Hi. It's been a while, but I am alive, as you can see. And in the time that it's taken since I've uploaded this video and my last video, I turned 21, which means in terms of the beverages that I can consume on this channel, I finally get to upgrade from Mountain Dew, and I think I picked the perfect time to do so.
Lilo and Stitch is a global phenomenon, and it's the #1 movie 3 weeks in a row.
Also cute and fluffy!
The original Lilo and Stitch is still my favorite movie from Walt Disney Animation Studios and one of my favorite animated movies in general, so I went into the most recent live-action remake expecting it to have a lot of things in it that pissed me off, even amidst the early reviews calling it one of the better live-action remakes. And the longer the movie went on, the more things I found about it that continued to prove me right. There's so much I could talk about here, from the effects to the poor direction to the changes that result in no character or story beat coming out unscathed in some way. Of those many things that upset me though, what I wanted to focus on is the aliens. Since Disney's already in talks of making more of these, I also found myself thinking about what followed and the choice to expand upon Stitch as part of the universe instead of his and Lilo's bond moving forward. I'm of course referring to 2 of the 3 direct-to-video sequels and the series that I grew up watching reruns of, all of which I think that, despite being flawed, are very underappreciated. When I say the aliens, I don't just mean how the individual alien characters are written, I also mean how the original movie and the franchise at large go about crafting a story where 2 distinct worlds collide with each other, those being that of them and of humanity. How they're integrated into the plot, what they contribute to the central theme, etc. So this isn't only going to be a critique of this adaptation from that angle, it'll also be an analysis of why it works so well in the original and a reflection on the legacy of Lilo and Stitch as a whole. Why don't they, as a collective, work here? One of the things that was most off-putting to me before the movie even came out was how it was marketed, but not for the reasons you're probably thinking. It can be easy to look at a poster like this with Stitch surrounded by a bunch of props and logos that Disney owns and immediately write it off as cynical.
Stitch be Iron Stitch. Yeah, I am Iron Stitch. Snap finger.
This isn't unique to this version of the movie though. In fact, the original had a similar approach like this poster and of course those trailers where he crosses over into other Disney movies. Stitch and his part of the universe have always been the main selling point of this franchise, and the key to its longevity, hence why most of the continuous narrative following the original movie is dedicated to expanding upon the space lore. Even with the original, a cute blue alien monster is a much stronger incentive for general audience members to go see a movie than rich, nuanced sibling dynamic with subtle race and class commentary. And that's by no means an attempt to diminish the value of those elements in the film, nor act like Stitch has nothing to offer outside of his high marketability. He's a good character that just happens to also have that. But while I can certainly see an argument that complaining about the remake doing so is a double standard,
I have to ask, will you be in the upcoming Avengers Doomsday?
okay, so here's some added context about the original in case you didn't know. Lilo and Stitch is the 5th film in an era of Walt Disney animation in the 2000s that's referred to by many simply as the post-Renaissance era, which is exactly what it sounds like. What followed a decade where they became known for their iconic musicals was a collection of films across a wide variety of genres that led to a bit of an identity crisis as a studio. To me, the thing that made this marketing approach work effectively was a combination of acknowledging that and a very clear understanding of tone. Co-director Chris Sanders, who also provides the voice of Stitch, was the one that made the suggestion to have him interact with other Disney characters as a marketing strategy. In his own words, I thought, if you love Disney films and you're in the other room and you hear Beauty and the Beast, or if you hear the Lion King theme, you're gonna be like, hey, what's that? You're gonna run into the room and you're gonna take a look. If you love Disney films, you're gonna see this trailer and you're gonna be like, oh, what is that? You're gonna be intrigued. If you do not like Disney films, Stitch being this disruptive presence that makes other Disney characters run or scream or have conniptions, you might be like, you know what, I think I want to see that. So in my mind, it's like, oh yeah, it's gonna get everybody. And I think that it really worked. Placing Stitch in scenes from these movies that are not only iconic, but carry a lot of emotional weight. His edgier and more unruly demeanor here stands out more because of how disruptive it is, and it puts further distance between him and what Disney is most associated with. That's what makes him stand out. It's a way of reaching a wider demographic while establishing credibility. There's a clear intent behind it compared to putting him on random posters for assorted Disney movies or the newest MCU film, and why it reads more like corporate flexing now than when it did in 2002. This is relevant to the way Stitch is written in the actual film, which we'll get to in a bit, but the long and short of it is, this is symbolic of a recurring pattern of misunderstanding why the parts of the alien world worked as well as they do in the original. When I first saw some of the initial reactions calling this one of the better live-action remakes, all I could think about was how the general lack of ingenuity in attempting new things has conditioned some people to think that change is automatically a net positive when talking about them. Stitch himself is the one I have the most to say about, as a lot of what involves him is directly connected to larger issues throughout the film, whether related to the aliens or not. Let's compare the ways he's introduced here and in the original. After it's revealed that Jumba has created an illegal experiment, he tries to sway the council that his creation isn't a bad thing by pointing to all his supernatural abilities that all diverge from his central argument in support of his creation, that he's valuable as a weapon of mass destruction. The Grand Councilwoman disagrees, but is willing to give Stitch a chance if he can indicate some sign that he's more than that. In the new version, though, both the way Stitch is presented and what Jumba draws attention to makes this response feel more out of place. He does still mention his strength, indestructibility, and intelligence, but not the fact that he's built to destroy, yet the scene still plays out like it does in the original. How is being good in the Council's eyes mutually exclusive from the traits Jumba uses to brag about him here?
626 is unstoppable and smarter than 100 supercomputers.
Nostalgia bait's a pretty common term used to describe these live-action remakes, where they keep a lot of the most well-liked elements of the original without taking into account how visual and narrative departures from it might impact how well they work in a live-action medium. It's also a mindset that comes with the presumption that the audience has pre-established expectations for what we've come to expect from the characters. The issue with Lilo and Stitch, though, is that the only thing Disney thinks would get people to see a live-action remastering of it is, well, Stitch. And as much as I would never be antagonistic towards anyone who disagrees with me on a piece of media, I feel like you'd have to have a pretty surface level understanding of the progression of his character and what that progression means thematically in order to consider this to be an effective retelling of his story. The main parallel of them having empathy towards each other being outsiders in their respective worlds is still there, but that's all it is, even though the reasons why they're able to bond are a lot deeper than how this remake presents it. Returning to the point of that opening scene, the main reason why I think this interpretation of Stitch reads as hollow is because the idea that he has no value outside of destruction is never an idea that's taken seriously, and that makes the rationale behind why he's an outcast, we're told through dialogue, be something that isn't supported by the screenplay. It's always played for laughs, making it hard to understand where other characters' fear of him comes from. I mean, one of his earliest interactions with humankind on Earth is a scene of him crashing a wedding party with Uptown Funk playing in the background. Now, tone is one of the biggest contributing factors as to why the aliens are able to fit in so well, knowing what aspects of their personality should be played for laughs and when they should in the story. Because you need to make sure that their inclusion never undermines the dramatic weight of Nani and Lilo's internal struggle following a shift in their family dynamic. Think about what it is that makes Lilo an outlier when it comes to interacting with Stitch, the only one who's willing to look beyond his aggression towards everyone around him, including towards her at multiple points in the story.
Hey, what is the matter with you? Be careful of the little angel.
While Stitch is never depicted as being justified in acting this way, she's able to identify the root cause of where it comes from. He acts out as a response to how he's viewed by everyone because he doesn't have the motivation to move through the world in any other way. Responses that involve fear or active retaliation are a form of positive reinforcement. That was Jumba's intention. So Lilo not reacting to his mannerisms with hostility, but with curiosity and compassion, marks the point where he gradually starts to be introspective about the idea that maybe he doesn't have to be like this, eventually resulting resulting in him becoming the character we all know and love. The best demonstration of that growth comes from the scene where he's arrested after defeating Gantu. Earlier in the film, he most likely would have tried to resist, but he comes quietly, only requesting that he gets the chance to tell his new family goodbye and saying his name for the first time. It makes the Grand Councilwoman's decision to bend the rules for him a lot more impactful because it demonstrates goodness she, up until now, thought was lacking. Bringing out a side of him that isn't monstrous is something that's unique to Lilo because of the intricate parallels found in their lives. She also can be difficult to deal with at times as a response to not feeling understood by most of the people around her, and that makes their relationship feel a lot more personal. So this change is working against the new movie in more ways than one. His presence now undermines the gravity of a lot of key dramatic moments with Lilo and Nani because of how much attention is given to his lighthearted goofiness. Not to mention that he no longer feels like he meaningfully raises the high stakes of their situation. Even in terms of jokes, the extent to which they play up his aggression made it contrasting with the grounded everyday elements of the real world a lot funnier than having him drink out of a lava lamp. There's one smaller change that I think is worth pointing out when explaining where I've been going with this, and it's not a subplot or new scene or removal of a scene, but a single line of dialogue that serves as one of the movie's thematic through lines.
Look, you're not bad. You just do bad things sometimes.
You're not bad. You just do bad things sometimes.
So this is the screenwriter's understanding of their relationship. They love each other even though they mess things up sometimes. If you haven't seen them yet, Stitch the movie, Lilo and Stitch the series, and Leroy and Stitch are built around the premise of finding the other 626 experiments and finding ways for them to use their abilities to help people, giving them a place where they belong. Likewise, if the thing you choose to focus on when it comes to the message of Lilo and Stitch's bond within the confines of the original movie, then that makes him interchangeable with any one of the other experiments. You could swap him with Angel, Sparky, or Slushy, and the narrative would remain unaltered. That's a problem. Disney doesn't seem to think this movie has any appeal outside of those aspects of his character, at least not enough to where they think audiences would be willing to put trust in a live-action adaptation. Because even though Stitch is inarguably one of Disney's most iconic characters, Lilo and Stitch is not one of Disney's most iconic movies. And briefly going back to what I was saying about the repetition for the marketing that they did in the 2000s, the reason why I don't think it hits the same is that if you were to put this version of Stitch in, say, an MCU movie or a Star Wars movie, at least from one under Disney, or even another one of their live-action remakes, he fits right in. So while it would be disingenuous to say that no effort was put into his character, what they did focus on is very misguided. But it's blatantly obvious why they did it, and I know I'm gonna sound cliche when I say it, but it needs to be said.
Capitalism, where everyone wins except you.
Yes, I do kind of recognize I'm part of the problem with this little plushie I got.
I bought you the same day I bought the bad guys books 6 through 11.
The total budget for this movie was around $100 million, half of what's usually spent on the Disney live-action remakes released in theaters. The reason for this being that it was originally supposed to be released straight to streaming on Disney+. This resulted in having a lot of restrictions for what they could do with the aliens besides Stitch in this version of the film. Jumba and Pleakley's role throughout most of the story is similar to how it is in the original. They're sent to capture Stitch upon him crash landing on Earth and have to do so without harming Lilo or anyone discovering the fact that they're aliens. Instead of using cartoony disguises like they do in the original though, they have these high-tech devices that allow them to turn into humans and blend in, and that's how they are for most of the movie. With the critiques I have about this change, I'd say it's more relevant to Pleakley than Jumba, so I'll start by talking about him. The two ways in which his personality is defined in the original is his fascination with studying Earth and these disguises. He's a lot more steadfast in making sure they follow the guidelines the Grand Councilwoman sets for them compared to Jumba wanting to catch Stitch by any means necessary. In addition to being really funny,
your head looks swollen.
Actually, she's just ugly.
it also serves as strong characterization, establishing a recurring theme of wanting to interact with all the planet has to offer, only to realize that's not all it's cracked up to be.
Now they're
And this isn't limited to the original movie either. Pleakley very frequently dresses in drag throughout the franchise.
There's a precious little angel. You must be the victim of a terrible misunderstanding. No.
There are a lot of fans who have interpreted Pleakley being comfortable in both masculine and feminine outfits as a sign of him being queer-coded, and headcanoning him as being part of the trans umbrella. I can understand immediately assuming the worst when it looked like they were going to remove this aspect of his character, but even though I knew it would definitely result in him losing a lot of the personality that made him so special, I was willing to give Disney the benefit of the doubt that maybe it was just a matter of not being able to make it work in CGI. If not for one thing. Dean Fletcher-Camp made a post on TikTok that featured a render of Pleakley in a brand new disguise with the caption,
"And I just want to say, I tried.
Recently, it's become evident that Disney's become much more vigilant when it comes to queer representation, especially in animation, presumably because of the backlash media under them that includes it generally receives. We've had 2 separate instances last year alone of them cutting already finished episodes that focused on trans characters in their respective shows. And in a political climate that's cultivated so much antagonism towards the people that come from this community, you cannot label actions like this from a corporation as neutral. This is all speculation. No, I will not try to say otherwise, but it's still a reasonable conclusion to come to. And this is where a lot of people are probably going to say, oh, well, Pleakley's not actually trans, so it doesn't actually matter, which is not the f***ing point. If you're going to exclude the fact that he dresses like a woman because it can be perceived that way, thus making it prone to outrage, you're indirectly taking a stance that that outrage is a valid form of criticism, when it's not. Now, let's assume that I am charitable with Disney about why they decided to do this, that it genuinely was a matter of not being able to have it work within the budget. They still don't replace it with anything that would work in live action. I mean, yes, there is one scene in the opening that does pay lip service to the mosquito plotline in the original, but they don't do anything to significantly build off of that, and it feels like it can be replaced with any other aspect of Earth.
Earth is a protected wildlife reserve. We've been using it to rebuild the mosquito population.
This is a core flaw that the overwhelming majority of live-action remakes have, and why people discourage the idea of continuing to normalize them. It goes far beyond the fact that they're bad movies. It's a failure to play to the strengths of the medium they want to retell the story in, because more often than not, it comes at the expense of the elements they want to capitalize on the most, which, as we've established in this case, is just Stitch. No attention feels like it was given to Pleakley, nor his dynamic with Jumba beyond a surface-level reading of his character. One's the uptight and curious one, and the other, oh shit, I have to talk about Jumba. So, the most noteworthy departures from the original movie's plot do happen in the third act. One of the things that was revealed following reactions to early screenings was that the original movie's antagonist, Captain Gantu, would not be appearing in the new film. Similarly, this was probably done for budgeting reasons, as Dean Fletcher-Camp has gone on record saying, but it's also something that had me concerned. As I stated earlier, Jumba's role throughout most of the story follows the original pretty closely, up until he decides to take matters into his own hands when capturing Stitch. Here they take things a lot further with his disregard for the rules put in place, and make him fill Gantu's role in the story as the final boss. Lots of people were reasonably upset by this change, since it took a character that was previously very likable with sympathetic elements to his character and had him go full on evil for the sake of the plot. Now, I'm gonna say something that might be a bit of a hot take, but just hear me out. As much as I do love Jumba in the original, I don't think that on its own is a strong enough argument for why he's poorly written in this movie. However, I do think examining his writing on its own in both movies will give you a better understanding of why I feel that way. One of the more subtle parallels between Stitch and Lilo is how, amidst their social isolation from both their communities, they have one person who values them before meeting. And comparing Nani to Jumba might seem like a bit of a reach, but think about it. Who's the only one who stands by his side after being sentenced to exile?
Oh, naughty!
I didn't teach him that.
Jumba's confidence in his ability to capture Stitch comes from the same thing that makes everyone consider him to be a failure. It's why he doesn't believe that using Lilo as a shield will work in the long run. He's built to destroy, and that makes him think that no one other than him will value him because of it. In a way, he views her the same way that Nani views Stitch, raising the stakes of their respective circumstances with the struggle to understand why they've been able to connect with each other. Like that scene where he inquires why he'd risk drowning to go surfing with her.
He cannot swim.
They're going well. Jumba, are they going well?
Why will he risk drowning?
Jumba?
These are ways of indicating to the audience that his motivations come from a lack of understanding, even when he tries to emotionally manipulate Stitch to come quietly after running away. So that scene where he and Nani meet for the first time and both come to a mutual understanding about Stitch and Lilo and put aside their differences to rescue her from Gantu is a resolution that's well built up to with how they've been characterized up to this point. And that's why Gantu feels like a more befitting final boss than he does. The absence of that personal stake in their relationship makes him more of a threat, which is why I disagree with the argument that his turn to the light is unrealistic. That and the fact that it makes for a great joke.
You expect me to help you just like that? Just like that? Ugh. Fine.
As for the 2025 version, his plan isn't all that different from what it is in the original. He still wants to rebuild Stitch without the empathy he gained upon finding Lilo, and I can see the events that led to this point making sense here. Like, he doesn't have any moments where he's introspective about why Stitch is going against what he's programmed for. But then there's the climax, where we get to this monologue.
I'm not gonna run away from all this. All these memories. Humans are so attached to each other. To their things, to the alien experiments they've stolen from me. Attachment means you care. And caring causes people to make very stupid decisions.
Okay, so this is Jumba's way of relaying to the audience what his motivations are. That his confirmation biases about the concept of attachment don't just apply to Stitch, but to humanity at large. And my main thought as I was listening to this monologue when I was watching the movie for the first time was, where did this come from? What about his interactions on Earth indicate that this would be a logical conclusion for him to come to? Jumba gets his prison sentence after creating Stitch. Then he gets a chance to earn his freedom if he finds and captures him on Earth with Pleakley's supervision. Pleakley uses the boring cloning devices to help them blend in. They try and fail to capture him. There's a new subplot they add with Bubbles where he's trying to capture Stitch behind everyone's back. After the Grand Councilwoman finds out that the humans know about their existence, Jumba is fired and she asks Pleakley to arrest him. And then he goes after Stitch on his own. Yeah, I'm still not seeing anything. It's something that's just thrusted onto him for the sake of raising the stakes and failing. This is relevant to discussing something else that makes Gantu work as a villain. We already know how he feels about Stitch from that opening scene and how it directly ties into his role in the final act. He resents him for the same reason everyone else does, and having a chance at regaining his previous position if he captures the one responsible for his current status directly relates to that. I'm not gonna act like he's a top tier Disney villain, at least not if we're just talking about this movie, but looking at it alongside this gives you a much deeper appreciation for it. Jumba's progression doesn't work here because of weak characterization that's disconnected from the narrative beats that are kept from the original, as well as him and the aliens at large being clumsily attached to or completely detached from the movie's themes. For as much as I could complain about their lack of personality here, i.e. Zach Galifianakis' performance, that's the main absence that's felt here, because without it, they're no longer a standout as these otherworldly beings occupying an otherwise grounded story. I know nowadays it's generally discouraged to give these movies any kind of attention, which, I mean, this movie's gonna make $1 billion at the box office. Hell, it might even be the new highest grossing live action remake of all time. I don't think anything anyone said on the internet would have stopped the people who wanted to see this movie from doing so. And I very much could have made this into a straightforward review where I talk about everything that I don't like about this movie for like an hour probably, but I wanted to focus on this specific aspect because not only is it a large contributing factor as to why I hold the original in such a high regard, but also because the way that they handled it here turned a previously unique story that was enhanced by the inclusion of these fantastical otherworldly creatures into something that's indistinguishable from any other sci-fi, or really any story where humans and non-human characters interact with each other. So, no, I reject the idea that this is a good remake, or even one of the better ones, and it's definitely going to be the last one that I watch. This was actually an outlier, all things considered, because I only watched Mufasa because it counted for the 2024 animation ranking last year, technically, but I still haven't watched Snow White, and I'm not watching How to Train Your Dragon, which definitely will be out by the time I finish recording all this. Because I don't care anymore. This was my favorite Disney movie, and there's pretty much nothing that can really make me upset anymore at this point. And yeah, if there was any movie that I think would be a good first time for me to finally drink alcohol on a video, it would definitely have to be this one.